Hello and welcome to another episode of A Sip of Sunshine, the podcast where we talk all things SEND and we get to know the people who are making a difference. This month we have another very important topic to cover, Developmental Language Disorder, also known as DLD. Now, DLD affects at least 2 children in every class of 30. It's the most common learning difficulty and neurodivergence, yet it's still not talked about enough. I'm really passionate about changing this, and I'm also joined by some fabulous guests today who are also really passionate about this. I met this wonderful group of women at the recent NAPLIC conference who are making a huge difference and undertaking some really impactful research. So let's get started. Welcome, Hannah, Jenna, Lauren and Anna. How are you all?
Oh, good, thanks.
Good,
Yeah,
nice
very
to see
well,
you.
thanks.
I'm quite excited about this because obviously we met recently at the NAPLIC conference and I was totally gripped by the research that you're doing. So, Hannah, start us off. Sorry to put you on the spot. Can you tell me a bit about the background of the research? Why did you choose to do it? How did you come to meet these amazing group of women?
Oh, thank you so much. Well, it was a really lucky for me actually as a researcher, because this is my kind of dream topic that I've wanted to look into for absolutely eons. My background is in DLD research, and what was really striking me when I was looking at the topic is the kind of real lack of family support. And it's a real family diagnosis. When a child gets that diagnosis, it's a really big thing for parents to hear, and quite often it is parents that get the diagnosis for various reasons. And I really wanted to understand more about what that process is like, but also about what we can do to support families after hearing that diagnosis, and moving forward, what's out there, because it's really difficult given that it's such a well, like you said, it's so not talked about. People have never heard of DLD, so I really wanted to understand that. So I got some funding to do this project, and what we know in research more and more is that it's not just researchers who can undertake a good project, because we only know what we know. I've looked at the literature, that's my skill set, and I know about methods, but actually I don't have that lived experience of what it's like, and what's really important to look at in terms of the subject. And even when I've got the data, I don't know what questions to ask necessarily, because I don't have that experience. And so therefore, what we quite often do more and more is we ask people who do have that lived experience to help us out and make sure that we're looking at the right things and in the right ways. So that's when I put out a call and asked, would anyone who is a parent themselves of a young person with DLD like to be on my project team? And that's when I met these incredible women, Anna, Lauren, Jenna and Kate, who's not here today but has made incredible contributions to this research, and that's how we got started.
The rest is history. I love that.
Exactly.
I love it. And that lived experience is vital, isn't it? Like you said, we can look at research, we can look at the clinical stuff, we can look at textbooks, but until you've lived that, and I think one of the things that we'll come on to later is that impact of having the diagnosis and what happens thereafter. And I know that this is a topic I talk about a lot with lots of areas of SEND, but that lived experience is vital because there's so much nuance. there's stuff that goes on at home that we don't hear about and we don't see documented. And, you know, Lauren, I know that this is like your life's work now. Your entire life is committed to making sure that people are aware of this. But when you first met Hannah, how did that feel, you know, in terms of being able to apply your lived experience to something like this?
It was really exciting just to have something that's about DLD going on, because one of the things you do when you get the diagnosis is you hit Google and you start looking around for things. And one of my motivations was, having come from an education background, having that really bizarre feeling of the speech therapist saying to me at my son's diagnosis, "Have you heard of DLD?" Thinking to myself, oh no, how on earth have I made it over 20 years as a teacher without having heard of this? I really should have. And that was a real turning point for me in terms of wanting to go searching for ways to raise awareness, spread the word. So when I found Hannah's sort of message saying, are there parents who want to share their experience about that moment of diagnosis, it was like just fabulous.
Yeah.
I can't remember. Oh, sorry.
No, it's all good. And, you know, I think, you know, I'm also a mum of a DLDer, so I completely get it. We have the lived experience as well. And I absolutely agree. I had almost an identical moment where I was sat with our speech and language therapist, Libby Hill, and she said, right, it's looking to me like we've got a working diagnosis here, because my daughter was 4 at the time. Got a working diagnosis here of DLD. I can't confirm that until she's 5. But do you know anything about it? And I was like, I run Sunshine Support and I've never heard of DLD. What is going on? So she said it's almost like a tip of the tongue syndrome, you know, or like dyslexia, but verbal. And then she started to explain it all to me. And I was like, okay, I think I get it to start with. I know that there's lots more learning to do, but I have quite a good understanding of SEND and speech and language. Not that I'm a speech and language therapist, but just because of the nature of what I do. But what about those who have no idea? They've not had any exposure whatsoever to anything relating to this. The impact is going to be huge, because it can start. I know with any diagnosis, you start to feel less than. You've got that guilt, you've got the shame almost, and also, did I do something wrong? You know, Anna, you know, how did you feel? You know, what prompted you to come into this research? You know, what was that process like for you?
Well, I think I had a diagnosis for my daughter probably for about maybe 3 years, I think, before I came onto this project. And I think I felt a little bit in no man's land at that point. I had some really good input by taking part in DLD Together, which is a really, really good course for parents with DLD, if you're sort of introduced into that world and you know nothing about it. And I just found that so useful. But obviously I'd done that. And I joined various groups on Facebook, and I'd also sort of signed up to receive, I think it's called Engage DLD, and it's a newsletter that basically gives you lots of opportunities where you can, either as a parent or as have a child with DLD, they can take part in research projects. And it was through that I saw this opportunity to get involved in the research side and to meet Hannah. And I actually thought, do you know what, this would add such a good layer to my understanding of DLD, but also I think it would give me that opportunity to be able to possibly make a difference to other parents, because effectively that's what this study is about. It's about sort of collating all that information about what happens at that point of diagnosis, looking at that, scrutinizing that, finding out what works and what really doesn't work, which is what we found as well with lots of, you know, the interviews that Hannah did, and then using that as a vehicle for trying to make a change or to influence, you know, particularly speech and language therapists going forward, so that they make a better experience for parents who are going through that diagnosis and in that moment. So that was my, that was my reason for wanting to get involved, to help, deepen my understanding, but to help other people as well. So I was delighted to be able to get involved.
That's amazing. And Jenna, has your experience of being a DLD parent differed to anybody else? Was there anything else that you were sort of hoping to achieve, or anything else that maybe attracted you to this piece of research? What was your experience?
So Hannah and I actually had a mutual friend, and I knew via her that Hannah was very interested in DLD. She knew via her that I was a little bit obsessed with DLD as well. So we came together perfectly in that sense. So I'd done a little bit of work around sort of raising awareness where I live previously, but this was an opportunity to do something bigger and, on a national scale effectively, where hopefully we can change policies and procedures for families across the country. So yeah, that was an exciting thing to be part of.
Oh, what a force, Hannah! This is amazing. Like, to get all this passion in one area, into one piece of research, from all these different viewpoints as well, because you guys, you are trailblazers. This is just fantastic. But you're not just sort of looking at this and going, oh, the research is going to carry us. You're going, right, I'm going to bring what I've got into the research, and then we're going to go poof, and bring it back out again into the way that we want to sort of translate it to the world. And that is so enormously powerful. It's got the opportunity here to be quite the beast, doesn't it? I mean, Hannah, you must be quite elated by how much knowledge is in the room, so to speak.
I really am, and I've been so lucky with this group. I think that you've just heard them about the passion and the dedication that they've got, and I think what that really speaks to is how much it's needed, how much families who get that diagnosis really need that support and need things to change, which I think is why we are having so many conversations when we go to conferences. People, there were queues of people lining up to talk to the parents in the group about their experience. And, I do feel extremely lucky, but also very, very motivated, because I think we've got a lot of work to do to really affect change.
Can I just add, I was thinking one of the things is that feeling after diagnosis where you are a bit lost and in that no man's land, and when you start to get a footing and you realize how big it is, wanting to do something proactive and make a kind of change. And one of the things that's in the back of my mind, having worked in schools for so long and known so many different families and different family makeups and children and their experiences, is not all families can advocate for themselves. Not all children can advocate or are having the same kind of experiences. That we're a group of mega proactive mums who are obsessed, as Jenna says, and are throwing this message out left, right, and center. But not all children are living that experience. So how can we? It's really nice feeling to be able to be a part of something that could have an impact on the lives of children who haven't got a team behind them as well.
Absolutely. And I think that, the power of the professionals looking at these children, because what we find as well as Sunshine is, if you have a neurodivergent child, guess what? You've probably got neurodivergent parents, right? And it's fascinating to see that you've got some neurodivergent parents who are, i.e. me, like a dog with a bone. And you're like, no, my child's got a need. And that's like an itch that I've got. So that needs to be scratched. Therefore, that need needs to be met. And I am a bit like a dog with a bone. And I'm not aggressive or anything, but I'm quite relentless in my pursuit of getting justice and getting what's needed. And I won't settle until it's right. And I feel almost blessed. Well, I'm very blessed because I'm surrounded by people here who get it. So I'm supported within my workplace. They're like my family. My daughter had her EHCP in place months after her diagnosis, and she's had the most brilliant provision ever since, and she's unrecognizable. So going from a child who really couldn't formulate a sentence, and she would have enormous meltdowns every time she was, expected to talk, but she so desperately wanted to talk, and she so desperately wanted to socialize. And she would have, completely go into freeze or fight or flight. She was a runner. She went missing during COVID quite a lot because she wanted to talk to people. She couldn't understand why we were being restricted. She scaled the garage to get out of the house, It was like, wow, she's really relentless. I don't know where she gets that from. But now you look, and she's just started senior school, and she is one of the most popular kids. She's incredibly confident. People who meet her don't see it because she's worked so hard at it. But the provision has it's sort of like been bolstered around her to support her. But I'm very, very lucky. I had the knowledge. I was surrounded by the people who knew. I understood the law. There's so much to it. And I think that's what really came out when I was listening to the research was, yes, it starts with that validation and parental support and information. And then we've got another stage, and that's where really the professionals need to support the families.
At the conference, I think somebody asked a question when we were presenting our findings so far on this. Somebody put a question along the lines of, do you need to give the diagnosis to the families at all, kind of thing? And the intake of breath across our panel was like, don't ever. Always give. It's not yours to hide.
No, they can't sort of gatekeep this information. Like you said, Jenna, it's part of your identity. We deserve to know. Imagine, if you had an illness and your doctor said, I don't want to go giving you a label. Well, how am I going to get the treatment if I don't have the label? And there is some, I know from sort of doing a lot of work in this area, DLD is just about the only learning difficulty that has scientific proof that it does improve and outcomes improve when we put the right interventions and support in place. So we can change the trajectory of a child, but first and foremost, we need to have that assessment and the outcome of the assessment. And it should not be a postcode lottery, should it?
100%. Yeah. I was going to say earlier that, DLD is associated with lots of negative outcomes like academic outcomes and social and emotional difficulties, but it's also associated with some really good outcomes if you get the identification and the intervention at the right time. And that's generally early and consistently as well, because in some areas it's just an episode of care and then you're sent off to survive. But DLD doesn't go away. We know that it will just, present itself in a different way as a child gets older and then goes into adulthood.
So let's take a break and we'll be back after a short advert. So what is school avoidance? Now, a lot of people call this school refusal, and it's really important that we reframe how we look at this, because actually our children aren't refusing to attend school, they're actually unable to attend school. Now, if a child was...
It's a powerful letter with a peppy sound that pops up in some of our favourite words. As we continue our reading adventure, we'll discover how the letter P helps us describe all sorts of things. Get ready for a perfect and playful journey.
To get excellent outcomes for their young people with special educational needs and disabilities. And what this means is that I get to see lots of different graduated response.
Our neighbours in space, the planets of the solar system. We live on Earth, but we're part of a much bigger family. There are 8 planets that all orbit or travel around the sun. Let's start with the closest.
How to teach our children and young people the skills they need to regulate their own behaviour, but in a way that really meets them where they are, rather than encouraging them to mask their behaviour so that the adults around them find them easier to manage. We hope you find this course super interesting and that you get lots out of it. So without further ado, let's go on to the first module.
And what do you think then the best practice would look like in terms of delivery of the diagnosis?
That's a really good question. I think different people have different ideas on what best practice is. And actually, we did ask people at the end what they would prioritize. But I think initially what came out was that feeling of that speech therapist recognizing that this was really a significant piece of news that they were giving to that family. You know, as professionals, it's maybe we know the positive outcomes that can come with intervention, and we know that quite often things will improve and we see good outcomes for young people with DLD, and it is, you know, a fairly common diagnosis. So maybe in that moment it's easy to forget that actually this is the biggest day for the person that you're talking to, whereas actually you might be giving that diagnosis every day. So I think it's making sure that that parent feels heard, and you go at a pace that is manageable for them, and you give them information and you give them space to ask questions, and then there's an avenue for follow-up questions and advice, whether that's kind of an online resource like Radwood, or whether that's saying, if you've got questions, you can contact this person, whether that's in the service or out of the service. And yeah, just making sure parents have that essential information and that ability for follow-up afterwards were things that parents told us that either were really important to them in that moment and really useful, or things reflecting on that they wished that they'd had.
I think also some information about next steps. So, you know, what will this mean in terms of the support that's available? What will this mean in terms of school? So people know that there's a plan and they haven't just been abandoned and they've got to figure it out themselves. Like, what is going to happen and what support is going to be there for you and your family.
I thought it was interesting, as Hannah was saying as well. We almost did we had a workshop session, so we brought all the parents that had done interviews back together, and it was such a great experience. You know, we all really felt that sort of commonality, I think, and we asked basically for those parents to sort of prioritize what they would like to get from that diagnosis appointment, you know, and all of those things that Hannah's mentioned. But for us, it was really interesting. The number one thing that they wanted was a clearer explanation of what DLD is. And I think that just, you know, that kind of says it all, doesn't it, really? That really sums it up. Followed by an empathetic approach and clear communication with schools, as you're saying, Jenna, those kind of next steps. But, you know, that number one thing, just to be able to know, you know, what clearly understand what it is, you know, I think that's hugely telling of, you know, so much of what we've already talked about, that sort of lack of awareness, and, you know, people not understanding in that moment, and perhaps not even having heard of the word DLD. So that was for me, that was a really positive, you know, it was a really positive part of the research, because I think it gives us something then that we can, you know, go to speech and language therapists and say, this is what parents need, this is what they want in that moment, and hopefully they can take that on board.
Yeah. When you presented that in the conference and you said, which of these do you think was number one? I
Yeah.
was surrounded by the most amazing speech and language therapists. And we were all sort of discussing. And I thought, I'm going to stay quiet because I'm,
Mhm.
even in that moment, with the most validating speech and language therapists who were incredible, I still felt I was just a parent. So my view probably won't be right. And I just thought that was really interesting to reflect on for myself. But they all said their answers, which were very similar. And in my head, I was like, well, for me, it would have been a real clear explanation. That's what I think people will need. And then it came up, and I was like, yes, I was right. Yes, my voice is being heard, and I'm not alone. But that is so validating. It's so validating to see that there is these common themes amongst the families.
And that's the
Yeah,
importance of,
definitely.
I was going to say, that's the importance of the lived experience,
Mm.
people telling us exactly what it is that matters to them.
Yes.
But there's a
Fantastic.
difficulty within that because we want that clear message of what DLD is, that clear understanding given in an empathetic approach. But if you dig back into the transcripts, there were sort of two different ends of the spectrum. One is I was given lots of information, it was too much. And my husband has DLD, so I don't think, or dyslexia, and I don't think he would be able to digest all these reams of academic stuff that I've been given. And then the parent who's given nothing, and the parent who's been proactive and has phoned back for that second chat. And then I also thought of the parent who said that they felt completely numb, in shock, and their response then was denial. So having the opportunity to phone back, they wouldn't because
Yeah.
they've kind of gone into themselves. So maybe something where the parent is supported to come back in and ask those questions again, where another appointment is booked there and then with the parent so that they don't have to think, because if you're in a kind of state of shock, you're not going to be necessarily able to manage all of those kind of things for yourself, are you?
It's interesting. So you sort of flit between, well, in my head, I'm flitting between, do we give a range of options, at that diagnostic point to say, well, here's what you can have. Here's a shopping list. In a perfect world, here's a shopping list. You can come back and have a one-to-one chat. You can read this information I'm going to send you. You can go to an online group. You can go to an in-person group. Having all these different options. But then, of course, if you've got a parent who, enters that denial, or maybe is going to take some time to process this, and so can't have these options delivered to them because it's just all too much right now. Really, then we're reliant on the individual clinician's assessment of the parent.
Yeah.
Of course, then really
Yeah.
varies because
Yeah.
that's going to be another lottery, isn't it? So it's really hard.
Mm.
It is hard to know, and I think just giving that acknowledgement to parents that this is a really big bit of news, and actually it might take some time, and what support do they need right now? Sometimes just asking the question as to what that parent needs in that moment might sort of help with things, and follow up. It's might be difficult in some services, but we already know that there are places across the country that are already making that change and are making sure that they are contacting parents again kind of a week or two following that diagnosis to just check in and say, how are you getting on? And that might be really supportive for parents who've had this whole range of emotional response.
So, ladies, what are parents telling you about the immediate aftermath of the diagnosis? What's happening?
Shock. Shock and numbness and disbelief and confusion and trying to find out what on earth happens next as a brief overview.
And worry, I think, like lots and lots of worry. So not just worry for the next sort of week or year, but worry for, because it's the lifelong diagnosis. So worrying, what will this look like at 20 and 30 and 40? What does this mean long term?
Yeah, I think that worry is absolutely enormous, like you said, because it changes. We've already said that, presentation will change because we're human. But because we don't have anything to refer to, if it was autism, we all celebrate these amazing autistic professionals, whether they're actors or scientists or engineers. And so you've got something to pin your hopes on. But with DLD, because we're not speaking about it, we don't know anything about it. There's nobody to go, right, that actor or that musician or that incredibly successful person without a problem in the world or seemingly has DLD. So, I've got hope that my child is going to be able to flourish and the universe will accept them. It's really hard, isn't it?
And actually, it's such a newly, it's kind of a newly formed term, isn't it? That encompasses, the speech and what was all sort of classified just under speech and language needs before. So it is a relatively new, not a new diagnosis, but a new term to use that for that diagnosis. So that's an interesting element of that as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that it raises as well the sort of myths that surround DLD? Do you find that, or did the research find that perhaps because they were left to their own devices, that they obviously were using Google, like we said, Google becomes your friend. But is there anything quite dangerous or damaging or mythical about what they end up finding and therefore that impacts their experience?
I think there's sometimes a confusion around speech delay and speech disorder, and then a confusion about what the lifelong aspects of it. I did one question to ChatGPT to see what it would give me. It was terrible, completely wrong. I asked it if it knew any role models, any famous people with DLD, and it gave me a list of celebrities with dyslexia. So I told the AI that, no, that's not the same thing. It's like, oh, okay. So slowly trying to support AI to get the right information. But
I was just going to you, Laura, and say, I love that your activism has become such that you are now teaching AI. DLD.
I think you're fine.
And I think another myth that kind of came through is that it was in some way that parents' fault. And I think that often kind of was something that kind of sat with people quite heavy. And then maybe they'd speak to friends and they'd talk about this new diagnosis, and there was that denial piece, like, oh, it will get better, or but they're so happy, or the school would say, that's not really something that we recognize, and so kind of the constant questioning that parents had to do of themselves, and knowing that they were really fighting for the rights of their child and what they needed, but constantly being coming up against kind of misinformation or information that wasn't helpful, I think put them in a very, very stressful situation, as people who were just kind of trying to advocate for what their child is entitled to.
You remind me then, Hannah, of one of the parents saying that they were told as a part of the diagnosis, and this is not your fault. And I think we all had a little lump in our throats when we read that one. So everybody in the room had that moment. Because I think I even went back to pregnancy, and I think I Googled multiple times, was there something in my pregnancy or birth that could have caused this? That kind of self-blame that you might have done something that made a difficulty arise.
We do instantly blame ourselves, don't we? So having that validation so early on would really help us move forward to get the bits that we really need, because otherwise we can sit in that. And I hear this a lot with a range of different things, and it's really hard for us as parents because we so deeply don't want to sit in shame. And by shame, I'm saying not shame because we're feeling shameful of our child, but we feel shameful of ourselves, and the possibility that we did cause something. So I guess that, one of the themes that I pick up on a lot with the work with parents that I do is the theme of gaslighting. But quite often gaslighting comes from us because we gaslight ourselves. And of course, external influence will be influencing us, but there's a whole range of emotions that goes on really in parents. And did you find that gaslighting was an issue? Was that something that came out?
In many ways, yeah. So many parents were kind of, even before getting the diagnosis, were being told that there was nothing wrong. And then, there was so much of that denial piece from grandparents, from family members. And I think it really kind of speaks to a kind of a form of ableist attitudes, that people think because maybe it's because of the word disorder that actually that implies that there's something wrong with the child, and I think that goes for all diagnoses across the spectrum that you can get. I know that when I talk about my own diagnosis, people's reaction is, "Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. I'm really sorry." And I think, don't be. It's fine. And I think, across the all the interactions that parents were having, that it was never straightforward, was it?
There was one parent there was one parent, sorry, Jenna, who was told, "I will not refer you because this is your fault. You caused this," literally, directly.
I feel a bit sick.
Which is possibly the worst possible version of being given.
How are they doing this job? Like, I get, this is where my anger really bubbles up, because I'm like, if that is what you believe, please choose another career.
That's like, supreme misinformation, isn't it? That's the ultimate level.
That's horrendous.
Yeah.
That is horrendous. Oh my goodness.
I think also just sort of going back to the sort of gaslighting sort of side of things as well. I mean, I've just pulled out a couple of the quotes here that sort of relate back to that kind of feeling of isolation and loneliness that I think a lot of parents sort of told us about, really. And it's about that sort of level where the parents found that they just couldn't talk to people anymore about it. And I think that's a sort of slightly different side of it, really. I mean, I've just literally pulled out one of the quotes where the parents sort of said, I literally have no one to talk to, because friends, now they've heard it so much, their eyes just glaze over when I talk about my son, and I can't tell them about it anymore. I can't talk to them about it anymore. And that's, she said, that's a really, really lonely place to be. And I think that's a slightly different take on that sort of gaslighting thing, but it sort of feeds into that as well, I think, doesn't it, really?
The fight for support post-diagnosis.
I think we covered some of it before about that approach being that safe, accessible, caring person that delivers the news, and being that person going forwards as well. So like we said, for that follow-up as well, it's not just a closed door. And I don't know what that looks like in terms of, how services would be set up to do that, but just that it could be a possibility to have another conversation a week, a month down the line, and connection as well with other families, other local families, that might have got a little bit more experience about what the schools are like, what support looks like in that school, or, you know, what hobbies and activities do your kids do where the facilitators are supportive and inclusive. So connection, I think, really.
Yeah.
It does come back to that, the prioritization task, as you say, Jenna, doesn't it? It was starting, that probably follows. So when we put the 10 ideas in order, it probably follows the experience of the parent. So if you're as Hannah called it, in the acute phase, post-diagnosis, the top 3, wanting to know what DLD is, having an empathetic approach and knowing what the support looks like, that's what you need immediately. And as you talk about, you get to the end of our list, being able to know other families. So Jenna's further along in her experience. That's where she is now.
Yeah.
So you can kind of follow the checklist down. Once you've got down to number 10, and I'm now looking out for other families, you know you're quite far along the line.
Yeah.
I'm in lots of like the Facebook groups. That's like a go-to for lots of families, and lots of people in those are just popping up every time they're newly diagnosed. They'll appear in the group and say, hello, just got the diagnosis. And then it'll be, how do I talk about it? And what help can I get? Can I get any HCP? Has anybody ever got any HCP? and kind of asking the same questions about the fights that they're starting to engage in and what's possible. So having those, what that looks like being signposted, it would be really useful, which is on pages like Aphasic and Rattled and Speech and Language UK. So it is out there, but it's that having to search for it as well.
Yeah. So what is next for you guys then? You've completed this phase. I know that you're excited about more to come. So if, you know, money and that sort of, you know, resources was not an option, you know, and it wasn't something you have to think about, what's next?
Well, what we would really like to do is to work on these things that families have told us that would have been really useful in that post-diagnosis bit, and involve them again in some more work and kind of design together something that's going to really support not just families actually, but the speech therapists and who are involved in that diagnostic interaction, because I think it's what's really important to say is that pretty much all speech therapists are doing their best, and they're doing a really, really good job, and they want to support families and they want to know how to support families. And if we can do that, if we can sort of help them from the perspectives of people who've been through it, and also create something that's going to be supportive in those first days, weeks, months following that diagnosis, that is my hope, that will just make that transition a little bit easier for families while they cope with and focus on the most important thing, which is their family and their child.
Amazing. And where can now your research, I know you can read it online, but one of the things that I absolutely loved that you shared, you probably know what I'm going to say, is the graphic, the illustration, which was a live illustration of your workshop, which I just thought was absolutely brilliant, because it absolutely screams of, we are communicating this in a way that's real, but also accessible. So where can people find this?
Well, I think it might be posted on the Birmingham City University website. There's a write-up of the research. I think it's there. I think it might be on my social media, which I'm not that good at updating. I think I've seen Lauren on LinkedIn, and I try to use Blue Sky. But yeah, just to credit Illustrated Live, Katie Chappell, who did the drawing. She attended the workshop, and as we were talking, and it was incredible because we were all sort of chipping in and talking over each other. She just produced this absolutely beautiful, incredible illustration that people were able to take away and share. But do you know what, Chrissa? I will send a link so you can put it in if you've got show notes.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. Yeah, we will.
So that you can find it.
Perfect. That would be absolutely brilliant, because I can honestly recommend having a look at this, because there's a lot of nuance. That's how you can read research, and I've done lots of reading of research, but sometimes you're like, oh God, the words are overwhelming. This was really nuanced as well, which I just thought was just beautiful and so easily accessible. Ladies, what you've done is absolutely nothing short of amazing. And I know that you're going to continue to do amazing things. And we've got more stuff planned between us as well to make sure that we're sharing this to the masses, because I think so many people resonate with the signs of DLD, but they don't know what is going on, and they're sent down the wrong paths, and they're sat on waiting lists for autism assessments and stuff when it possibly isn't, and there's much quicker ways of getting the support in place. And so I think that there's more for us to do, loads to do collectively as well. However we can support, we will support, and getting that information out to parents as well. And I've been writing notes throughout thinking, oh, we could launch a support group for that. Yeah, we could do something in person for that. So I'm itching. I'm like, right, I'm going to go and get creating now. I'm going to start launching support groups. So you've definitely created a movement, which is really, really positive. And I think, that the energy is infectious, the passion is infectious. And I think that we just need to keep up the good work and keep talking about it, keep shouting about it. But it's been an absolute joy to have you all here today, and thank you so much for giving me your time. It's been really, really brilliant, and do keep me updated with any developments as well, because we will do whatever it takes and whatever we can to help you with it all.
Well, we definitely will. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Been a pleasure.
Been fun.
We've come to the end of another episode of A Sip of Sunshine. I really hope you've enjoyed. Please do listen to our previous episodes and subscribe on our Spotify and YouTube channels. Next month, we're going to be covering neurodivergence in the workplace with real life examples of what works well and what doesn't. Remember to subscribe to get a reminder when the podcast is published.